Britain is facing an economic meltdown. Let me explain why. The person in charge of the Treasury is Keir Starmer. His assistant is Rachel Reeves. I've never seen two people looking more worried in my entire life when they got the keys to number 10 and 11. And since then, they've had to do things to A, reassure the markets, and B, somehow get control of the government budget. Well, a budget's pretty easy. Money comes in, money goes out. But that's the simple part. Now, Maggie Thatcher once said that running the economy was like running her father's grocer's shop, and her analogy wasn't too bad. But the crisis has just been kicked down the path for days, weeks, hours. It'd be interesting to see how the markets react. But however the markets react, we don't realise we've been conned by Tony Blair, who abolished the free market in 1997. You're going to go, James, you're talking shit. Well, I'm not talking shit. I've got a fucking degree in economics, and I've got a proper degree in economics where I know Marxist economics, I know classical economics, I know new classical economics, and I know Keynesian. And the trouble is, 100 years ago, if you were a Keynesian, you'd get laughed out of university, because Keynesian economics is... So, what Rachel Reeves faces is having to cut spending while somehow get tax revenue in. Well, to get tax revenue in, you actually have to have production going on. You have to be producing something. You have to be earning something. You have to have people in work. Because if there is a major labour shakeout, which, if you've ever seen Paul Walton's videos, he's quite good. When you see the number of people who are going to become unemployed soon, oh dear, big problem. Because if we had a labour shakeout, which is needed, by the way, because half these jobs are not even productive, half these jobs are wasteful government jobs, half these jobs are basically people peeing around with a socialist economy started by Tony Blair. So, let's get back to 1997. Blair introduced price controls. He introduced the socialist economy. And not many people noticed this. But what he did was to immediately set the price of the one thing which controls everything else, and that's the price of money. Now, I'm going to do a longer form video for anyone who understands economics, but in a market for loanable funds, you have savers, you have borrowers. The price of the interest rate in a country should be the equilibrium price between what borrowers will want to borrow at and what savers will want to save at. But what we immediately created was an artificial shortage of savings. You read the papers, the savings are at low levels in this country, yet the price of money, which is the interest rate, is low. So where's this money coming from? It's coming from overseas. Now, we got a warning shot in 2008. We got a sign that something wasn't right in 2008, and that was 11 years after Blair did this. You would have thought that was the time to sort it out. No, they didn't. What they then did, and all the baby boomers loved it, was what the 1997 decision did was to artificially keep the interest rate low, artificially, by Blair's MPC, Monetary Policy Committee. This was basically a socialist committee to basically artificially keep the price of money low and let foreign capital flood in to basically fund a property boom. Ever notice that? Ever check the price of a house in 1997? You need to, because house price growth has been well above wages and inflation for about the last 30 years. Now, 1997 was 30 odd years ago, and now we're about to face the economic calamity that will happen because we have had a property boom. Now, if you create a bubble, that bubble will burst. The Americans will tell you that, because in 2008 they allowed their housing market to correct. We have not allowed that. What Alistair Darling, who is now dead, did was to print money. Now, then in 2010 you had the wanker Cameron come in. He said, I'm going to have austerity. He didn't have austerity. What he did was to cut things at the edges. But he had a coalition. He had Liberal Democrats to keep happy. He cut back the deficit, but he did not eliminate the deficit. Thatcher came in and said, you must never ever run a deficit. You must never do it. She said that should be a rule. Basically, Major abolished it. We have been running a deficit ever since John Major was Prime Minister. So, we are now screwed. The current situation is that the government's budget is under such severe pressure that they have to find savings in the spending column. In the income column are taxes. Now, taxes come from spending, which is VAT, and also from income tax, and also Blair's stealth tax. Blair did the first nail in the coffin. The next stage is we're going to get an Angela Rayner government. There is one alternative, but even that possibly will not save Britain. We are screwed. If Angela Rayner becomes Prime Minister, there will be capital flight. What will happen is that people with money are going to go, bugger this, I'm taking my money and I'm putting it in the United States, I'm putting it in Europe, I'm putting it in Afghanistan. Because if she becomes Prime Minister, she is going to go, let's just tax the wealthy, let's just tax those who are rich. That has never worked. It either ends up in a communist revolution or it ends up with major economic collapse. So, we are screwed because of what Tony Blair did. No one else. Tony Blair kept the interest rate far too low. What did Cameron do? Cameron did not do the reforms that was needed. He did not stop this little gravy train. Instead, he made things 10 times worse. So, people who talk about the Uni Party are actually wrong. The Uni Party was set up by Blair. He made it almost impossible for an incoming government to undo what he had done because he gave everybody completely ridiculously cheap money, which the boomers then went out and spent on getting about 3 mortgages and about 4 houses between them. That's why no one other than a baby boomer can afford a house. So, I'm prepared to do a much longer video on this. The problem we are in now is because of a decision made in 1997. If you put a price control on like that, you were going to have problems down the line. Because if I kept saying to someone, oh, you can borrow money at no interest, they're just going to borrow money. If I go to the bank and I see interest rates of 0%, I'm not going to save my money, I'm going to spend it. I can do this with a diagram, but we have a completely unsustainable financial system, and it's very simple to explain. We are heading for an economic calamity. Whether it happens on this government's watch or if an incoming government comes in, I do not know if a proper Conservative government could actually sort this one out. Because what needs to happen is a radical overhaul of the economy. We need to stop telling people that you can buy a house and it will keep on rising in price. Just ask anybody in their 20s and 30s. Because they can't afford to buy a house. Now, apparently AI has looked at this and gone, well, house prices will increase. Well, that's because foreigners are now buying the houses. Now, apparently 13% of London is owned by people in the Middle East. This is what's going on. So, we are rapidly going into a situation where we are going to face political and economic crisis. That's the next video.